Welcome everyone home and here, and the first thing that we have up before we get down to the financial strategies discussion is committee reports and items of interest. And I'm going to take you briefly through, I went to the U.S. Conference of Mayors conference a week ago. So I'm going to just share some of that with you. Georgetown has, so I'm just going to go through a battery of little things that I learned and I thought might be interesting to you guys. Georgetown has an online clearinghouse for climate adaptation that we can use and contribute to, and we've been invited to do that. They have toolkits that allow you to go deeper into the topic. Grand Rapids, Michigan has downtown student facilities like similar to what we have, and they talked about how their students have helped their downtown become more alive and thrive. I thought you'd be interested in hearing that. After listening to people, I came to the conclusion it would be really good for us to hear from our Public Works Department at a council meeting about the kind of adaptation things that we're already having going on. There was some discussion about cities divesting their resources from dirty fuel, including pension funds. Oak Park, Illinois is run 100% on renewables. We got to hear from Bill McKibbins, well known from his 350 work. And there's a new organization, I thought Mike would love to hear this. There's a new organization called ALICE.
Alice?
Mm-hmm. It's the progressive equivalent to ALEC. Where you can get legislative ideas from the other sort of side of it.
Always fun at this table.
I know. And then they were talking about that companies think in terms of regions and not cities, so we need to think about how we brand our region. And they, like we've heard from our state economists, talk about small business is the answer. Bring regional mayors together around economic development. That made me think about the fact that I think it would be wonderful for us to bring to this table Metro partnership information, Chamber of Commerce information, folks that can talk to us about what the lay of the land is in terms of economic development for our area. We have, having a summit is not the same thing as having people come and sit down and talk to us about how things are. And I'd be interested to see a picture of that, both aggregated and aggregated in terms of the county and disaggregated in terms of Eugene. They suggested that neighborhoods should have business plans. I thought that was an interesting concept, too, that different neighborhoods have things that are special to them. Another interesting thing to talk, that was brought up was we have to sort of recognize that we need immigrants to have sufficient youth in the country to pay our future bills. And a deeper analysis of our economy and how it works, that our decisions reflect that. I know the Chamber and others have done some work of cluster work, sort of an analysis, but I don't know how deep they've gone. That would be an interesting thing for us as well. And the other thing that I think is around the Envision Eugene work is they talked about you need to be sure you keep families in your inner city, because families actually spend money. Young people and older people don't spend as much as families. If you want a vibrant inner city, you've got to keep your families in the
They recommend the best ways to do that?
Spend the money?
I think what they were suggesting was when you think of multifamily dwellings, be sure you're not just thinking of old and young, but you're thinking of multifamily dwellings that can actually accommodate families as you do your Envision Eugene work. And they talked about things like the need for granny units and for school buses that you could utilize your resources differently, like school buses could be used to deliver seniors, zoning codes that would welcome child care, engaging young people in the planning for the city, when you do transit-oriented development planning for families as well as elders and young people, like I just said, and reward talking about rewards for ideas and taking chances, that if you don't create a place where risk can happen, you don't get enough very fresh ideas. And make sure our kids are participating in the well-being of the city, and the city is participating in their well-being with great purpose, that we should be thinking cradle to career. Fill the experiential gap for young children, and especially giving them the opportunity for being in workplaces. Zogby poll shows 56% of the public thinks that the Obama administration is going in the right direction. It's to be purposeful in aggregating our food cluster. Now's the time to push for solar, for our ability in new buildings. It has the capacity, if not already in place. And grid independence, and I think we were doing some work on looking at broadband, right? And anyway, utility partners in owning this. That the new thing that's going to be happening with utilities is that they're going to have to think of themselves differently and become kind of a partner as we use less energy, how they can still play and be solvent. So it's going to call for a really different approach. Thought it was interesting that Ray LaHood, who's head of transportation, said that there's never been a national freight plan. And you're in the process of developing the first one. And the other thing that's interesting is natural gas lines. There are no regulations on natural gas lines. So there's nothing there to currently to protect those lines like you have for other resources. Those are tidbits from my journey to DC. A lot of interesting things to think about and build on. And we have a mayor's one-on-one tomorrow at 5:30 at Albertsons on 18th and Chambers. All right, to you, sir.
But I just have one question about that natural gas line. Is that federal guidelines? Don't we have something some local guidelines?
Most states don't have anything.
That's interesting. I'll pass.
Thanks, Mayor. I don't have a lot to report. I attended a couple of neighborhood meetings, downtown neighbors, and friendly area. They were pretty routine, no big things looming on the horizon. That's about it. I do have a question for the manager. And I'm just wondering if, John, if there was ever a kind of a final report that staff may have done regarding the neighborhood leaders, kind of their investigation with the OBO and that whole flap. I mean, we received, an email from the city attorney and one from the neighborhood director, Michael Kennison, and I was just wondering if there was more of a kind of a formal report about that, and if so, I'd like to see it.
Yeah, we'll send out what we have to you. There's
Okay.
not a really large report. We did take a look. We interviewed neighborhoods, and Glenn did his legal research and then provided the opinion back. But I can get for you any additional information that there might be.
I'd appreciate that. Thank you very much.
Greg?
I'll pass, Mayor.
Okay. Patty?
Thank you. I did attend the Workforce Partnership Executive Committee meeting. The last time we met, it was the day before the meeting. And what we're really focusing on is work readiness certificates and attempting to become a work-ready community. And anyone who has never been there should go and look at the place on Oakway, I think it is, the central place where they do a lot in cooperation with LCC and others to help people get ready for whatever work there is. And I've been receiving lots of emails and telephone calls, some of the calls not so nice, the anonymous ones, but about taxes and about social host ordinance also. But this one person asked me to read her email. She just sent it to me and asked me if I would read it at council, so I suppose I could do it now. And this is from Dr. Diane Morrison Wilson. And it says, I've been a voter in Eugene for many, many years. I do not want another tax imposed on me, especially one that would be $240 per taxpayer. Our government in Eugene is turning into a social government like Greece. This is a burdensome tax. There will be a tax revolt against the city if you persist in pushing people to pay more taxes. It's totally unwarranted. And as I stated, you will face a taxpayer revolt if you persist in voting for this $240 tax. And that's all I have. Thank you.
Okay. Alan?
Thanks for that report, Mayor. Representative Barnhart's doing a town hall meeting. I think several other representatives, Paul Hovey and Senator Prozansky, at least, are going to be there. It's a town hall meeting. It's Tuesday this at 7 p.m., which is tomorrow at the U of O Loki Education Building, which is on Alder, room 176, so if anybody wants to go. Yeah, 15th and Alder. Laurel Hill Valley citizens are having a meeting on Wednesday, February 20th at 7 p.m. And congratulations to the U of O men's basketball team. They were ranked number 10 in the country as of today in the AP poll. So
Long way to go before the season's over.
still, number 10's good, especially when they weren't ranked.
Mr. Optimism here.
Yeah, thanks, George.
Thanks, Alan. Claire?
Yeah, thank you. So I've also attended the Human Services Commission meeting and the LRAPA meeting, and no big news out of either of those at the moment, although LRAPA was curious about our budget process. I said I have no news on that. And I also attended the Downtown Neighbors Association meeting, and a couple of weeks ago, the Trainstock Neighborhood Association meeting, at which we had a presentation by Opportunity Village organizers, which was very well received by the neighbors, and we had a very good dialogue between the Opportunity Village representatives and both the Neighborhood Association board and neighbors who just came to be part of that conversation. I think it was very positive, and there was a number of city staff there as well, which was great. And then on Saturday morning, I went out and met folks who were volunteering in Ferndale Park off of River Road, and saw the great work they're doing out there and chatted with the folks there. They've even recruited folks who used to live near another park and had adopted that park and now came over to Ferndale Park to do plantings there. And the Parks Department liaison who was working with them told me there are now 30 volunteer park groups operating throughout the city. So we do have very engaged neighbors working in their local parks and making a real difference for their community, and I just wanted to thank them all, the ones I haven't met, that are doing that. It's really inspiring and important and fun. And that's my report. Thanks.
I'll pass, Mayor. Thank you.
Chris?
You already mentioned the Mayor's One-on-One at the Albertsons at 18th and Chambers. But the other one I'll mention is over the weekend I had the chance to attend the Fix-It Fair, which was held in the Bethel area up at Willamette High School. And thanks to all the different organizations that participated in that, and Babe and the other folks from the city who were involved in that great event. Hopefully we'll see Fix-It Fairs, which you come and you learn about things, but there's also information about how to do your taxes and how to fix it kinds of things, but also lots of information. Really nice event, and hopefully they'll begin to do them in neighborhoods all over the city. So I think this is the first one, and as we get it rolling, people learn about it. It should be a really great event. So if another Fix-It Affair shows up in your neighborhood, be sure and attend. It's a really great thing.
Kind of a wonderful illustration of doing reuse, recycle kinds of work, but you don't have to call it sustainability. You just teach people how to make better use of what they
how to take better advantage of what you've got.
Yeah. Right, that's a great creates a lot of access for people that might not otherwise. City Manager?
Thank you, Mayor. I just mentioned that the Mayor, Babe O'Sullivan, and I had attended a one-day state workshop entitled Cutting Edge Communities, and this is coming out of the Governor's 10-year energy plan. You might remember I was a part of putting some of that together on the transportation side. And it's a pretty interesting group. In a nutshell, it's really trying to figure out how do we reduce our energy footprint and at the same time be economically sustainable as we work through that. And so the first of, I think, a number of discussions around this particular topic, but I thought it was pretty interesting. So.
And, our City Manager did a great job of leading one of those workshops, so it's very good.
So.
And also, he and I were at the opening of the new Lord Liebrick on East Broadway, and the play Nearly Normal, Next to Normal.
Next to Normal.
Next to Normal, which was excellent. It was just really, I mean, I don't think, I go to a lot of plays in Ashland, and this is certainly competitive with any that I've seen. The quality of this was just phenomenal. So I would recommend it to anybody.
We should
And
say
a great
that-
asset for kind of boosting our culture, arts and culture district. So
And Lord Liebrick is transitioning there to a new name,
Oregon Contemporary
Theater.
Theater,
Yeah.
right? Yep. All right, and that's all I got. Thank you all. I guess we're ready to have you lead us into the next conversation, City Manager, on financial strategies.
Great. Well, thank you very much. And I know we're in the process of handing out the motion that we're proposing. I wanted to go through just briefly a couple of slides here to just reset the stage of where we've been, where we've got to most recently, and then based on feedback and comments from you, where I'm proposing some alternatives to our original plan of action. And so with that, just a reminder, what we're trying to resolve is a $6 million gap in our general fund. And again, we're talking general fund, not all the other funds. We do have to continue to work with those, and the Budget Committee will have some conversations around that. But we talk about the general fund primarily because that's where our discretionary dollars come in to the city. So we do have a $6 million gap, and this is $3 million more than we anticipated this year. We talked before that particularly our property tax, which makes up 65% of our revenue into the general fund, has just not come into the city as we had anticipated in our relatively conservative estimates from last year. And what have we done to date? Over the last 4 years, we've done a lot, and we have focused significantly on the expenditure side. We've reduced $24 million of expenses in our general fund, and that represents 20%, which is significant. Our general fund is between $120 and $125 million. We continue to maintain prudent reserves, and the reason why we do that is to enable us to mitigate or moderate fluctuations that occur that are higher than normally anticipated. A good example of that is as we've had to absorb the library levy. That's been an important part of what we've been doing over the last 4 years. We have eliminated more than 100 positions within the city. We've achieved a lot of efficiencies, which has really enabled us to get to the $24 million, to include new partnerships. Animal Services is a good example of that. Our merging of fire departments between Springfield and Eugene is another example of saving dollars while at the same time maintaining our service level, and we've done that throughout the organization. We've also continued to look outward. We haven't strictly focused inward. We have continued to invest in community goals that you have said are important to us and to this community, and so it's public safety downtown, it can be economic development goals. We've invested in human services and those kinds of things, and we continue to do that. We really have tried to minimize our impacts to community services. There have been impacts over the last several years. The Budget Committee and the Council has had to work through some very challenging situations. As you know, this last year we reduced branch library hours. We did reduce some funding to animal services and transitioning to a new model. Parks maintenance has been reduced in certain cases, so there have been impacts, but we have tried to minimize that because what we do know is that throughout the recession, particularly, a lot of people in this community do rely on the services that we provide, and so we have tried to continue to do that. We have not raised taxes, and we have minimal fee increases within the supporting of the general fund. Wrong way. And we've shown this graph several times, and I think it really tells a very compelling story that we have been driving down expenditures. for the 7 years prior to entering into the recession, our average annual increase in our general fund general fund operating budget was 6.2% per year. Over the last 4 years, we have driven that down to 0.6%, and that's while absorbing the library levy, for example. So we have driven down our expenses. We have worked very hard on the expense side to structurally balance our budget and live within our means. And you've seen this also, and really the essence of this is a couple of points that come out of this that says we don't have the option of not doing anything. What this says is that if we choose to not close the $6 million gap, or if we choose to close the $6 million gap strictly with one-time dollars, that red dotted line is what results. And so that's why we've continued to emphasize one-time money versus ongoing money for ongoing expenses. I'm going to talk a little bit more about that with this alternative proposal in just a minute. So we do need to do something as we move into the future. The options that we have said is we increase revenues, decrease expenses. As I mentioned, we have done a lot on the expense side. What's new this year is we have recommended an increase in revenue. We're continuing to decrease expenses, and as you remember, as part of our plan of action, part of that is to continue to reduce our footprint. I show you this, and I handed out this earlier, and many of these you have seen from previous years. And so from our perspective, as the executive team started to decide how we are going to balance that revenues versus expense discussion this year, part of what we've said is we have reduced our expenses, we've tightened our belt, we found new partnerships, we found efficiencies, we've done all of those kinds of things in the best way that we know how. We will continue to look for those kinds of things this year and into the future. For us, as we started taking a look at reducing additional expenses, we're getting past the efficiencies, the productivity kinds of things, and we're really moving into that next level of service reduction that can be pretty significant. So if you take a look at this list, this is our next list of things that we would start reducing as we go through the budget process. And I sent to you before how we got these onto this list, and I'd be happy to talk more about that later. It's just not a random list thrown up there. There's a couple things that I think are significant. I'm not going to go through all of them, but the total of that list is about $7 million. This is not the recommended list for a $6 million filling the gap. But if the direction from the council is we're going to fill the gap with additional service reductions, this is the list that we're going to be drawing from as we move forward. So if you take a look at some of these things, they have significant impact into our community. A lot of the things that will impact the community are for those that don't always have immediate access to things otherwise. The pools are a good example. If we close Echo Hollow Pool, there are a lot of people in this community who otherwise don't have an opportunity to engage in aquatic sports. If we eliminate some of our human services that we provide into the community, there is an impact on people throughout the community because of that. And you can go through the list and sort of look through some of those kinds of things. So based on all that, as the executives, we had to decide what we want to do with that. We've been driving down the cost. We take a look at what's that next level of services that would be impacted. How's that going to impact the quality of life of all the citizens that we serve in a variety of ways? And so then we developed a plan of action which says we need to fill the gap. That's our financial stewardship responsibility. At the same time, we recognize that we need to strengthen the economic prosperity of our community, grow our tax base for the long-term sustainability for our community. We want to maintain community services as much as possible and provide for future financial stability. And so for the original proposal, as you remember, we did some surveying. We have talked through the last couple of years through Envision Eugene Counts, neighborhood meetings. There have been a lot of conversations through the Budget Committee and otherwise. And based on all that feedback in the most recent surveys, the majority of the community has said is they're willing to invest additional dollars of their hard-earned money to ensure that we maintain the services that we have, that we don't erode the services. So that influenced the plan of action that we chose to come forward with. They said they preferred a monthly service fee rather than other choices, so that's why we initially came with a monthly service fee. They have said that they're comfortable with council controlling a portion of those as opposed to having strictly restricted, and so our recommendation reflected that. They were very mentioned that accountability and transparency is important, so the recommendation of an oversight committee, for example, was important to our initial plan of action. And they talked about some of the support for a new fee around fire and ambulance roads, which we already dealt with the road bond, which the public invested in, economic development, human services, and quality of life. So this started to frame out our initial plan of action that we presented to you several weeks ago. We did get feedback from you on that initial recommendation, and based on that, we have made some changes. And what we heard is that the total cost to households is just too high. So when you take that into account, both the transition of the the parks maintenance cost in the general fund to stormwater plus a new fee, that the total cost was just too high. You had some concerns that the city service fee, the new city service fee mechanism, is regressive. So we've tried to address that. There's been some concern about the collection of a new fee through eWeb, and that an agreement had not been reached, and so we've tried to address that as well. And then there were some comments that did come in from the community about a service fee is not deductible on people's income tax, and so we have also addressed that. So our revised recommendation, we will continue to look for footprint reductions, and so for example, we're still working towards what we hope is plus or minus $800,000 of footprint reductions, and those are a good portion of that will be through overtime, continuing to try to find some efficiencies and reducing our overtime budget. So close to about $300,000 of that, almost $500,000 of that is in reductions in overtime through more efficiencies. We also are finding some savings in our contracts as we go about implementing some software programs, and we're also moving all of the major maintenance costs of Holt Center away from the general fund. We've been doing that over the last couple of years, and so the last phase of that would occur in this year as well. And so we are continuing to look for those efficiencies, and we'll always look for those efficiencies. So footprint reductions continues to be a part of it. What we've said modification is we'll cut that stormwater fee in half, $5 up to a maximum of $5 rather than $10 maximum. If you take a look at the stormwater fee, that particular component, when I showed you that list of items, that the stormwater fee will pay for or ensure that those items stay in place with, as we go through the budget process, either we'll have to make some reductions or we use one-time money to transition across. And so you know that I am the last guy that will recommend using one-time money for ongoing costs. But it's serious enough in my mind for the quality of life in the community that it's more important to move forward with what I what we believe is a good plan around the stormwater and the parks maintenance and bridge across with one-time money for a year or two. So from my perspective, that's key. But we've cut that in half. Then we've said, rather than a fee, we'll go out with a property tax levy, 5-year levy that addresses the regressive portion of a new fee. It's for the same things that we've talked about before. The average median home would pay $51 per year, and so if you take that $51 per year plus a $5 stormwater fee, compare that, what was talked about was $240, it cuts it in more than half. So we're addressing the total cost to the household portion of that as well. Oversight Committee would still be a part of that, as well as all the other elements that we talked about. And then the remaining budget gap, because that doesn't fill the entire, through all of that, the $6 million, as I mentioned, we would come back either through some one-time bridge, or the Budget Committee will go through the regular Budget Committee process, and we would make a recommendation on a combination of additional expenses that we would cut, or one-time monies to bridge the gap, and then the Budget Committee and eventually the Council would approve a plan for that. So we've, I think, significantly revised based on what the Council has given us feedback on over the last week or so. So this is what we're presenting as options for motions. The first one says bring back to the Council a revised stormwater and parks fee. That does a couple things. It says that only the Council for FY14 can set the fee, and that would get determined if a fee is needed during the budget approval process, and then it could be set no higher than $5 per month on the residential, for residential customers, and send out a property tax levy for the in place of a new service fee. The second option would be as we're preparing the budget, base it on no new revenue, and then really with the understanding that we will use that list of alternative budget reductions that we just talked about as we start moving to close that $6 million gap. With that, we're here for questions.
Thank you, City Manager. I want to first of all say thank you for listening hard to the Council and to me and to the people in the community and trying to respond accordingly. I appreciate the effort. I also want to say, I know you say it every time we have a meeting on this topic, but I heard people at our last meeting saying you need to make the hard choices, and I want to reiterate that I think that this Council, this staff, and the Budget Committee have been making some very difficult choices for the last 4 years. And if you think about a general fund of $125 million, 24 out of it is not a small, it's a huge amount of us doing the same thing that families all over this state and country are having to do, is pull in our belts just like everyone else. So much so that we feel like that there's no more room to pull if we want to keep providing the services that we've, or at least a portion of the services that we have been providing. George Poling, you're next.
Thank you. I don't know if I'm going to need a second round or not.
Okay.
But going through that chart of the service cuts, I believe that there's 8 of them on there that I can look at real quick that reminds me of the old days when I worked for the county. First thing that's on the chopping block is public safety. And I think that if we start taking out of the public safety sector, you're going to get such a backlash from the community. It's going to be an uphill battle on anything. And I'm not just talking about the feet on the street and the guys pulling the hoses off the truck. I'm also talking about the hazmat team. I mean, where would we get a hazmat team if that went away? I'm also talking about the teen court program, which is very valuable. I'm talking also about the Looking Glass funding and the St. Vincent de Paul car camping. Although these are not actually police or fire functions, I consider them part of the public safety because they are helping. And the very last one you have on that list is a Sell Laurelwood Golf Course. Why haven't we?
Yeah.
You know, not only that we'll be saving $50,000 a year, but there's some more facility maintenance money that we can have. And then on the community feedback survey results, I still say no way on the council control over investment of funds within restrictions. Because this council may have an idea, and it may go with what the public thinks, but 2 years from now or 4 years from now, this council makeup may change, and it may go completely the opposite way that the public thinks that we were supposed to go. So I think we need to be real narrow and specific, like we were with the road fund on that. I don't think the council should be able to do that. And then one question is, on that same slide, is what is quality of life? What does that mean?
I think for us, a lot of the things that generally aren't related specifically to public safety, parks, libraries, aquatic programs, athletics, are all a part of those kinds of things that we think about as quality of life. And there's probably some others, health and arts and culture and those kinds of things. So.
And then, John, I would like to disagree with you. You said you're probably the last person that wants to spend one-time money on. I think I would be the last one to want to do that, and I think I've made that point quite clear in all the budget processes that we've been through. And I'm going to continue that stand because once that money's gone, that one-time money, such as the facility reserve money, it's gone. We don't have it, and we don't have any way of getting it back. And then on the revised recommendations where it says footprint reductions, I think what needs to be added on that and options for consolidation of more services with our governmental partners. I think we really do need to take a real long, hard look at that and start a conversation with the other city managers and the county administrators, see if we can get more consolidation of services. And then if this goes to the public, if it goes to a vote, if it gets passed, what mechanisms are we going to have in place to ensure that money's not shuffled around? So what the county did in 1986 with the law enforcement serial levy, we don't do, and lose complete trust with any trust with the voters.
A couple of things. One, of course, on the stormwater park service fee, we're still recommending that the council implement that not go to a vote. So that's one piece. The second is with a levy, we would also recommend that's built into that is an oversight committee, just like we have with the streets bond, in which that committee evaluates exactly around, are you spending the money in the way that you said you would spend it and what we as the community authorized you to spend it. And so it would be that same kind of a setup. In that particular instance, there's actually a CPA audit function in addition to an oversight committee, so we would recommend the same thing for that levy.
Thank you. Go ahead and put me in the second round,
Okay.
just in case.
Okay. I've got Chris and Claire and Mike in the queue. Chris, you're next.
Thank you. There's no way around the fact this is a really difficult conversation to have, and one we've kind of stepped up to a couple of times in the past, but I think we're past the point of being able to step up and not have to complete the conversation. And I really appreciate all the efforts that's being made to hear what was said at the public hearing and what folks were saying, and the fact that we're coming back wanting to revise the original ideas, I think, is really a step in the right direction. I think going from a user fee to a serial levy is what would go on the ballot, for all the reasons you stated, is probably a much, much better idea for a whole host of reasons. I don't want to make any of these cuts, and I don't want to sit here and say, these are the ones I like, and these are the ones you can go ahead and cut, because each one of us will have a different list. This is what you, as the professional leader of the city in terms of operation, this is what you are going to recommend, and I'll stand by what you recommend. We may change it, but this is what you would recommend. And in looking at this list, there's a whole bunch of stuff on here I don't want to cut. I think we would have a whole lot of people who would come to us at the budget committee or whatever and say, I don't want you to cut this. And the challenge we've had is, with every single one of these items that nobody wants to cut, we can't, that conversation doesn't go anywhere anymore. We just can't do that. And I would agree that core services are core services, and there's a debate what is in and what is not in the core service, and I'm willing to participate in that conversation as well. But I do think that if we're not going to step up to the revenue, and this is for me what the final element is, if we're not going to implement or ask for or put in place some sort of a revenue-generating idea, we're going to have to cut this much money. And if it doesn't come from this exact list, it's going to come from a list very like it. And nobody's going to like it. But we are done with the ability to say, we don't need more revenues, we'll just live within our means, because, you know, it's like being in the lifeboat and there's not enough food to feed everybody. Somebody's got to go over the side. And we can't just keep spreading the food thinner and thinner. Somebody's got to go over the side. I think we've reached that point. And who goes over the side is not a decision I want to have to make. I'd like to get some more food in the boat if we can, and that's what I'd like to figure out. So I think I'm willing to continue the conversation about the stormwater fee. I like the fact we've cut it back. I think it's something that we should definitely examine some more and see if we can make this something that has the accountability built into it that would keep us from losing at least as much faith with the public as we can preserve. Whatever mechanisms. It's an ongoing fee, so I don't think you can be as specific as you can with a short-term thing, but we've got to have safeguards in it. It has to have safeguards in it so that it can be protected and demonstrate our desire to be accountable. And I look forward to that piece of the conversation.
Claire?
Thank you. So I really want to thank the city manager and the staff for bringing this responsive revised proposal to us. I think part of what the error we may have made in the previous iterations was trying to be too, to craft something that was too responsive to the ManRA survey that we took, which, you know, surveys like that are valuable, but they're really a snapshot in time and not necessarily ongoing in terms of people's attitudes. A lot of dynamics changed in between the time we took those surveys with other entities such as eWeb making decisions that impacted people's pocketbooks. So I think the greatest value from that survey really was giving us direction in terms of what types of services the public views as a priority for preserving through some mechanism. And I think that guidance is really valuable to us as we think about what types of services we would want to attach to a proposed levy and the specifics that would be funded there, which I think would be important to any levy that we put out. I really appreciate the fact that we are going to put off the park maintenance fee proposal right now and revisit that within the context of the budget committee discussions. I think that is very responsive and will be important to have that discussion in the context after May's ballot and the other items that might be on there for the county, for example. So those are my reactions to this revised proposal right now. And I have some more questions, but the only question I have right now is just in reference to the fee. You mentioned in that option 1, section 1, a fee for residential customers. So is that a little change? Because before we talked about residential and business.
I know Alan previously had talked about potentially trying to tier that in order to give it more sense of equity. It doesn't make it truly progressive, but at least having a little bit more sense of that. And so what we're saying here is just to be clear that it would be no more than $5 for a residential customer. Then if there's a tier system that's set up somehow, then that can also be talked about. So that's why we wanted to clarify that.
Okay.
Mike?
Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor, very much. Just a couple of thoughts with this. I'm not in favor of the idea, as I wasn't the other day. I believe the best strategy is still for us not to look at adding new taxes, but to look at how to expand our tax base, to add more taxpayers rather than more kinds of taxes. It was interesting that George said what he did about Laurelwood, because I was writing that down during the course of the notes I was taking here. I wrote down to ask some of the public works folks that I saw that were here, they could give us a market value of Laurelwood Golf Course and the undeveloped acres behind it at a time when during Envision Eugene we're looking at ways to grow within the urban growth boundary and where to put more residential housing. I'm wondering why it is that the city holds on to that land instead of selling it for that purpose that would certainly accomplish many goals all at once. And I'd say that the money would be much better used in that way than running a golf course that loses 6 digits a year. So that seems like a better value and a better use of that asset to me. One of the interesting things I don't get to say anymore, and I get to this time, is having missed the meeting the other night with a family obligation, the public hearing, I watched it on computer. I watched the video, and I agree with Bonnie Bettman. I don't get to say that anymore.
You said it before.
Yeah, I think once or twice, maybe.
Once or twice.
Yeah, I appreciate the fact that the manager backed off the portion with regard to the particular swap for parks maintenance. I hope that we maintain that as the stance here, and the reason is because oftentimes we hear people talk about how difficult it is to cut the general fund because of the large percentage of it that goes to police and fire, and yet we were about to make it worse. And I think it's a bad idea for us to take other, what I would consider lower priority items, off of budget and off of the general fund's use, and they should be competing with other priorities for the city in the general fund. Lastly, I'd like to say that I wish during the process of this we would talk about this from an apples to apples comparison. We're talking about how we may have to make these cuts and that's going to hurt people, but we're not talking about this in a relative comparison to say, okay, if we cut these services, how many people are going to be hurt and whom? Or if we have to add several $100s to everybody's tax bill in the city a year, how many people are going to be hurt and whom? Because I would venture to say that number is more significant.
Alan?
So I'd like to also thank you for listening and being responsive and also being nimble. I know that's not that's why we hired you, and you do an excellent job at that, John, and so does your staff. I know times are really tough for people. Another cost on top of where they are can really make a difference between whether or not they make it or not on a monthly basis. And I wouldn't even look at revenues unless we had, or until we had, tightened our belts, became more efficient, reduced our staff, and made significant cuts. But the fact is, we did all of those. This isn't something that we just kind of stumbled on. We've been doing this for several years. We've cut 20% out of our general fund, or $24 million. We reduced staff positions by 100. We wrung out all these efficiencies that we could in the way we provide government services. And I wish we could grow our way out of this, but we can't. These cuts are on us in the next couple of months. So we're down to cutting more, which means people and services will be eliminated, which impacts quality of life, or really directly, or raising modest amount of revenue. When I look at the list, it really gives me pause. When I look at this and I see elimination of the Human Rights Program, elimination of the Neighborhood Services Program, elimination of the Sustainability Program, elimination and reduction in jail beds, police investigations, a fire station company, closing the library downtown for a day, closing Echo Hall and Sheldon pools, significantly cutting rec services and eliminating human services funding, eliminating the car camping contract, and reducing parts maintenance by a ton. All those things
Don't forget the bathrooms.
And the bathrooms. All those things, along with, not even to mention the things that we added back, like the homeless services that we did this year. It makes me cringe to think about that. I'm really hard-pressed to say that this is on the backs of public safety at all. Especially over the last several years, we have added more than $21 million to the public safety budget in spending. And we've invested more in public safety than everything else combined in the city. So this is not, we had public safety as the highest priority for this council and where it should be, but 2/3 of the general fund is public safety and fire. They can't escape it anymore. We're at the point where we have to reduce services, and they're not going to be exempt from it. So to me, the question is, what kind of city do we want to live in? And when I look at this, and it's $45 from the levy, $60 from the stormwater fee, so about $100 or $9 a month. I think a lot of people, for the average homeowner, a lot of people, that's doable. And I'll need another round.
Betty?
Thank you. This is much better than the original proposal. I like the idea of the levy and the limit, having it end in 5 years so that people get a chance to vote again. I really like the fact that people can vote whether they want it or not, rather than our doing it. And it is not, no tax, we don't have access to any tax. It's totally fair, I think, but this is more fair than asking every household to pay the same amount of money. I am not ready to commit it all on a monthly fee, a flat fee for stormwater. And I hope we don't even vote on that now. I know we're not voting that we're doing it, but I am far from ready to say a flat fee is okay. I would still think there may be other possible sources of revenue that we could investigate if we need more than what we get from the levy. And I'm sure we do need more than that. But and also I'd like to know how the stormwater fee is calculated now. I think it isn't the same for everyone. And if it is raised, why couldn't we raise it by the same percentage as it is now done? If that's a question.
I would probably want to get back to you on that more specifically and not sort of off the
Currently,
cuff.
it's not a flat fee.
Correct. It's based on impervious surface by category.
And that would be a...
Flat. All residential is flat.
Yes, residential is flat based on that there's an average amount of impervious surface, so residential fees are flat in that respect. And then others are based on, it's more variable based on impervious surface.
So if we were going to raise that, which I'm not committing to at all, couldn't we do it the same way?
We could, but I think what we're trying to do is, one, as I think going back to George's comment, is we do want to ensure that these dollars are not intermingled, and so part of it is how do you keep those separate. I think that's an easier way of separating that. And I guess I'd have to probably get back to you to make sure we're answering your question in the best way.
Another question, what we put on the ballot, this is not, do we have the wording? We don't have the wording yet.
We do not have the wording yet, that's correct.
And are we good? I hope it's flexible enough that we don't have to say this and this and this exactly.
What we would be doing is, if we get direction tonight on this first option, a part of the first option would be bringing the levy back as part of your public hearing on February 4th. Based on that, on your February 11th work session, what we'd be asking is for very specific. Would they actually be approving language at that time, or what would that be?
If you gave us direction after the February 4th hearing, then we could have for you the ballot language for your February 11th meeting. If you didn't give us that kind of specific direction after the February 4th hearing, then on February 11th, you would need to give us that direction, and we would bring back final language on February 13th.
And that's the deadline, right?
February 13th is the deadline for referring something for the May ballot.
And it can be, we could adjust after the public hearing.
Yes.
Thank you, that's all.
So I just wanted to say that we go between referring to the fee as a stormwater fee or stormwater and parks, and I asked the city manager after our last meeting if there was any reason why we couldn't just call it a stormwater and parks service fee, to be perfectly explicit, not like we're trying to hide one and the other, but that it indeed is two fees put together. And so henceforth it is called on everything the stormwater and parks fee. We're not trying to not let people know about what we're proposing here.
Right. Essentially, I think just and the way that shows up here is under first part is bring back for council consideration revised stormwater and parks service fee ordinance. And so what that would actually do is put that into the title and allow then parks to be a part of that fund. So that's what that does.
And I know we think we're clear on it, but I just want to say to the public that should we do that, what you're doing is trying to take something that we already are having a struggle paying for, which is parks maintenance, moving it over into a separate fund so that you can create some ongoing way to pay for that important city service. And when you take it out of general fund, then you create more space within general fund to pay for some of the things like the pools and the library and those kinds of things that are on the list that we could lose. So I just want people to know that it's really trying to make room in our already smaller, shrunken general fund to pay for some of the more basic services by creating an ongoing fee for something that we're already struggling. Park maintenance has become a real issue for us in any case.
And just to even clarify even a little bit finer on that, would say that in the original proposal that we made with the $10 stormwater fee, what that would do would be fix in place everything on this list going forward. $5 it'll be approximately half, a little bit less than half, and so the filling that remainder portion that is not fixed in place will be a part of the budget process, like our normal budget process. And so that's what that proposal is.
But we know when we were done.
Say it one more time.
What was in it at the end of the budget process, what was in it, we would know what that is.
Absolutely. Yeah.
All right, so second round, I've got George Polling, and then I have Alan, and then I have Mike, and then I have George Brown.
I wasn't in the first round.
Oh, I'm sorry, George. Did I skip? Sorry.
Oh, you did inadvertently.
I did. I get the wrong George. I'm very sorry. Go ahead.
Thanks,
you're
Mayor.
up.
I've just got a couple questions. I'd like to go back to a question that Claire posed. Was it's not just residences; it would be businesses also. Is that correct?
For both of them, yes. For both, actually, the
For both,
stormwater
yeah.
and the...
I was specifically thinking about the stormwater.
Yes, correct.
And it would just be a flat fee per month. So rather than, it wouldn't be based on, say, like a large user, it wouldn't be based on impermeable surface. It would just be the...
Would not be based on impervious surface. It would be a flat fee, and I know Alan has talked before about tiering it, and so that could create a delta in there, but right now it's...
I like that idea of tiering it. Well, the reason I asked that, I just, I ran into a 4J board member at one of the neighborhood meetings, and he was kind of asking me about this proposal, and I don't think I'd seen the packet yet with the new information, and so he was going on the old basis, and he goes, was unaware that was also being a proposal for a flat fee. So I'm just wondering, this 4J in particular, is that going to be each school, each property, each...
It would be by actual account that they have a stormwater account. I don't know how many stormwater accounts the 4J has.
I don't need to know the exact number.
But that's what it would be based on.
They know very well how many accounts they have. It's more for their information to calm their minds about, oh my God.
And I've had some communication both with Shelley and Colt around the proposals.
Okay, thank you. Let's see, you had mentioned earlier in a conversation about, you thought that you'd find about $800,000 more in efficiencies, and I think it'd be good if we could see that list. I mean, we don't have to know the details right now, but I think that's terrific, and will be a really positive thing to show people that it's like, yes, we've trimmed a lot, but there's still some trimming we can do, and I think it'd be a really positive message to send to people, especially when we're going to ask them to voluntarily
We can provide some more
raise their
information on that.
taxes a bit. And let's see. I'm curious about the methodology for the storm water fee. I was just fiddling around, after hearing about the first proposal, I was fiddling around at home guesstimating how many residences there were and guesstimating how many businesses there were, and it's not crucial, but I just would kind of like to know how you arrived at these figures as well.
We don't have that right here at this
Well, no, of
table,
course
so
not.
yeah, but we'll be able to get back to you on
But
that.
no, get out your slide
Okay.
rule right now and tell me right now. That's all. Thanks.
Okay, now we go to second round. The other George.
Okay.
Remember those.
Just a couple of questions. In your proposed motion, John, your recommended motion, bring back for council consideration revised stormwater park fees ordinance, park service fee ordinance. Will that be subject to the public hearing on the 4th of February also? Or will that just come back to us for a vote? And if so, when?
Our intent is that you've had your public hearing on the stormwater fee, and so we've heard the feedback on that, and that we would anticipate just bringing it back to the city council. And depending on how the conversation goes, it could be as early as Wednesday or as late as February something or other.
Okay. So if the public wanted to comment on the proposed revised stormwater and park service fee, they would either have to do it via email or come to the public forum that we have before our Monday night meeting. But it's possible that we could actually be taking action before we have another one of those public forums. Is that correct?
Yeah, I mean, we'll obviously look to the council for guidance on that, and so meet your needs.
Okay. And then the list of that you have out on possible reductions, is that available to the public online so they can actually get that and see what we're looking at having to cut?
We can post it and make it available.
That would be good.
That would be a good idea to do that. Thank you.
First, what thing that you brought up, George? Just now, the
Public hearing covering the number one.
Yeah.
So it seems to me, however you guys decide to go forward with this, as it moves into the budget process, there will be many times to weigh in on that discussion as it moves.
All right, so I just want to make sure the clarity around this particular option would say is, our intent would be is to bring back the revised ordinance that would say this is now a stormwater and park service fee. What the fee is or isn't would all be a part of the budget process, and so we would not bring back, we're going to go ahead and set it at X amount of time. What we would say is you can't do it more than $5, so this isn't just an open-ended invitation, it really is but what we would want to bring back, and that's why I say it could be as soon as Wednesday, because there isn't a financial transaction going on, it would just be creating the ordinance as a stormwater and parks fee ordinance, and then the actual setting, the actual fee, if any, would be through the budget process, ultimately approved by the city council as part of that process.
Okay, Alan,
Can you hand those out, Glenn?
you're next.
So, if I understand this correctly, for the average homeowner, the levy would be about $45 per year.
It'd be about 51. We went
51,
yeah.
okay, 50. And then about $60, $5 a month for the stormwater and parks fee. So about $110 a year, or a little over $9 a month.
Correct.
Right, for the average homeowner.
Right.
Okay. So that's doable for most people. It's not doable for everybody, but it's doable for most people. And we can fix the not doable for everybody part, I think. For those that it becomes a hardship, we need to help them with a low-income program and make the stormwater and parks fee more progressive by tiering it. And I have a suggested motion that we could add to the motion that the city manager put forward that is in front of you there, which actually calls for a tiering of it, of the stormwater fee, to make it more progressive. Currently, right now, the way the stormwater fee is done for the stormwater portion is that it's a flat fee for every residential customer, and then a user fee for everybody else based on how much impervious surface they have, meaning parking lots or rooftops. And so the more they have, like a Walmart has a lot more than a small mom and pop, so they pay more. It's a user fee. It's based on how much they use the stormwater system. So if you just simply increased it, it would still maintain that flat fee. It'd just be a higher flat fee for most residential folks. So what this does is actually tier it and have it be in 3 tiers, so that it has a roughly based on the way eWeb major customer groupings are. So the first tier would be for low income, so they'd have a program or an exemption from not paying the fee. So that would handle the people who have a hardship with it. The second fee would group the residential and small commercial customers together, and that would be $5. And then the third group would be the large and commercial and industrial customers, which do pay a lot more, and they would be about $25. And to see how much that money, and we could work the math out, but so it would make it progressive. So you get the low income people, the residential and small commercial, and the large customers, industrial customers, and large commercial users, so that it would be a more progressive structure. So when that motion comes up, I'm going to make this as an amendment to have that be a more of a progressive system. So, yeah, I'm willing to making this more progressive. I'm willing to move forward on both the stormwater and the levy, and having the public hearing and hearing what people have to say, and then making decisions in the short term, and then in the budget process on the stormwater and Park Street.
Mike, and then Chris, and then Betty.
Thank you, Mayor. I'm glad Sue's at the table here. I have a question, actually, that I think is more for you. I know that budget is proposed in April, but I know you guys start working on it back in November, and I know this will change. The answer to my question will change over time. But I'm wondering if you can tell me currently what you think the FY14 increase in silt, eWeb silt, over the FY13 number is.
I don't have that off the top of my head.
Based on anything that you've heard, do you have any kind of guess? Because I know that's something you guys work with, and I brought up in previous years. And
I don't have that information with me, but we could certainly.
Would you send that to me based on what you think it is today? Thank you. The other piece is the manager's done a wonderful job of reaching out and talking with all of us about his thoughts on this and the changes, and I appreciated having the chance to talk with him about that, and he gave me the chance to air my concerns with that, and I just didn't think of one the other day when we were talking, so I didn't want you to think I was sandbagging you here bringing it up now. As I've been thinking about this, I have another concern about it that I wanted to voice, and it's this, is that it's kind of a principal disagreement with the process of taking particular issues or particular problems and separating them out from the general fund into silos of specialized funding. As a principal disagreement with that kind of way of doing budgeting, I look at the city and the county, both of whom, and please correct me if I'm vastly wrong, I'm going to overgeneralize here, but both of whom have a very similar amount in their all funds budget of about $500 million, more or less, roughly. The county's discretionary general fund, the amount that the commissioners can decide to spend is what now, like 50 million in terms of their discretionary general, what they can decide to spend. And the city's is about 100 million. So ours is
120.
Okay, thank you very much. That makes my point even better. We still have the capacity to take a look at relative priorities within the scope of the general fund and say, because this is what the citizens of the community expect from us. They say, well, why can't you just decide which are the higher priorities and which are the lower priorities and fund the higher priorities? One of the reasons we often can't is because we've siloed specialized funding into particular problems in particular areas. And if you look at the county, the only thing they have left in their general fund really is public safety. And so the discretionary things that need to be cut need to be public safety, and it's why we don't have a jail, is because they're spending $500 million, but they're not able to effectively cut some of the other things they spend money on. With us taking this off budget and taking it onto its own specialized silo of funding, we're doing the same thing. We're simply limiting ourselves and exposing public safety to more and more cuts in the future because we have so many fewer options.
Chris, you're next.
Mayor, I just want to make sure that everybody understands it's not off budget. the Budget Committee and the Council has the ability to talk about the entire budget through the budget process. So I just want to make sure people realize it's not off budget.
He's
It wouldn't
correct.
be
I
in
meant
the
it's a
general
political
fund.
distinction.
Yeah, it's not actually in the general fund, so.
Chris?
It's interesting that he brings that up because I remember, oh gosh, it was probably 20 or 25 years ago when I first read Reinventing Government. One of the interesting components in that was the public's demand that we silo money as a way to ensure that we didn't abuse our fiscal responsibility. They only felt we could be guarded with money if we were very specifically constrained into silos in terms of how we could spend the money. It was interesting, and so we would love to be free, but it was the public that said, we don't want you free with your money. It's got to be in this silo, it's got to be in this silo. So it creates this dynamic where be careful what you wish for, you might get it. Just for my clarification in terms of the sequence of what we're talking about doing is, we want to talk about a stormwater and parks fee mechanism, but the actual content of it would be something that would occur as part of the regular budgeting process. In other words, what you would, if you could have your ideal, what you'd like to do relatively quickly is to get approval from the council. In other words, our endorsement that this particular mechanism is okay. We can use this mechanism. Now, how it gets used and how much money is actually allocated for it would then be involved in a longer process through the Budget Committee, and the public's involvement. They could come and they could provide input, and they could say these are the elements of it that we like or don't like, and this is the amount. Because this is up to 5. We may hear through the budgeting process that we'd only like to go for 3 or 4. But what we need to do, and what you would like to see relatively quickly, is to know from us whether or not we even consider this mechanism one you can use. And so you would like some clarity on our even willingness to go there. So the vote tonight would be to say, prepare the ordinance. Let's take a look at it, and if we find it acceptable, then we'll consider granting this mechanism to use in the budget process. So that's why we don't know what the amounts would be. We don't know what the specific elements would be. There would be a larger body and a larger process that would actually consider what the contents would be. That's why I'm willing to keep this ball moving down the court, because as a mechanism, I do want to explore it some more and see where it might go. I do understand the time constraint around the levy, because we do have a filing deadline we have to meet, so I get that absolutely. But I was wondering, why do we need to move quickly on the fee? We need to move quickly so you have certainty about the mechanism. But we will have lots and lots of time to talk about the content, the amount, the uses, the appropriateness, the accountability, all that stuff would then occur later on. Okay, good, thank you.
Betty?
I'm not willing to say that we're going to have a fee at all at this time. I'm willing to vote for the levy. I think that's a good idea. And as for Alan's idea about graduating a fee, if we had one, it's a good idea, but I don't know how you find who can't afford it. Whether they would have to make an application, give their income tax forms, or what, and people can't afford it for different reasons. It isn't necessarily because of your income, it's partly because of your obligations, just as we have obligations as well as income. And I would prefer that we postpone discussing a possible fee and go ahead and concentrate on the levy at this time. Thanks.
Alan and then Greg.
Yeah, I think we figure out I think we first say there needs to be a low-income program that helps people who have a hardship paying it, and then figure out the details about what the best way to do that. We can either have that be an exemption if your income level is such and such, if we can get that information through the eWeb program, or if you apply to their low-income payment assistance program, then you're automatically qualified. So, I mean, those are some details that we need to figure out, but I'm confident we could. This whole notion of siloing funds, I've often thought about that. The first thing I learned when I came to the Budget Committee process years and years ago was there's no such thing as money without strings. Everything has strings on it. There's the parallel universe argument that says, I wish we didn't have this and we could do whatever we wanted to, but we don't live in that parallel universe. We live in this one. And as Councilor Pryor said, we didn't impose these rules. They're state laws, and people have put these rules on us so that we actually, that people have demanded that we have constraints on our funds, that there's strings attached to them, so that the road money gets paid for to do roads, that the stormwater stuff gets paid for stormwater infrastructure, so that the SDCs that we pay for roads and parks and other infrastructure that we need, so that it's very constrained. So now we only have 20% of our budget as discretionary, and 2/3 of that is already taken up by public safety and fire. So it's like less than 5. It's like 5 or 7% that we actually have that we have to do all the other things we want to do, like libraries and parks and human services and all the things that are in that list that would get cut are the things that are what we call discretionary, and they tend to be the things that are impact, I think, people's quality of life. And I don't want to see our city get to the point where the only thing that we provide is public safety and fire. That's not what a city's about. There's a lot more to a city than just having those really basic services. They're necessary, and we have to do them. And as I said before, we've invested more in public safety than everything else combined over the last couple of years, more than $21 million. So it's not like we're not doing that. We have done that in spades. But now it looks like these things that are going to be cut, I think we should put it out to a vote to see if people want to keep them. And so I would support going forward with a levy and having that go to the voters for a vote to see if they want to keep it that way.
Greg?
I'd like for us to consider a third option and support Betty's idea of going with just a levy. I think that we would be remiss in not allowing the people to decide whether they want to raise their taxes or not. I think that for us right now, considering our economic situation, not only at the city, but I want to consider the economic situation of our residents. I know people who, if they're older and the spouse passes away and a pension disappears, they're not going to be able to make it. And I think that we really need to have the people consider and decide whether they want this increase or not. So I support Betty in that, and I think that we need to prepare a third option.
Okay. George, you want to put a motion up?
I've got a couple of questions before I do that. Alan, in your proposed amendment, you talk about a rate for residential and small commercial and a rate for large commercial and industrial. Is there a scale already being used by eWeb to determine that, or is there a scale used by the city to determine impervious surface that we can apply to this, or is it something we'll have to make up on our own?
Well, as you know, I grew up in the utility business, electric utility business, and the way that utilities group, and every one of them does it slightly different, but basically they grouped them into these residential, small commercial, then large commercial and industrial groupings, and there's different rate schedules. So it's a way of getting at who these customers are and attaching the bill to them, which is fairly easy and simple to do. I mean, this is broad enough that we could fit it in the way eWeb actually does it and what the demarcation is between these different specific customers.
Okay.
It's usually based on their service,
Right.
size of service.
Mr. City Manager, what is your opinion on Alan's proposed amendment? How does that fit into yours?
We vote on your raise, remember that?
Yeah, Mike.
Go ahead, be honest.
Which will be
Down.
It'll be
For
two.
2 years in a row. Graciously.
I'm fine with it, and here's why. The pieces for me that are important with that. It does add a greater sense of a feeling of equity. It's not pure by any means, so I don't think we should advertise it as purely progressive, but it does try to get there. It's not administratively, you just have a couple of tiers, and we would work with eWeb, and really eWeb contracts with, I believe it's HSC, to actually carry out their customer care program. So that may be how we would do that too. So we would have to work that to make sure it's administratively can be done. I don't think it's so burdensome that it now creates a whole nother list of issues with that second tier. As written, haven't seen this specific for very long. I don't have any concerns with it immediately. We would tweak it to make sure it actually can fit within the framework administratively.
Okay. And then, Alan, in response to your comment about how we've raised public safety funding $21 million over the last several years, we may have done that, yes, but we're still under the national averages for both police and firefighters per 1,000 citizens.
Yep, true.
So we still need to keep working on that. And I will go ahead and put out the city manager's recommended option number 1 with a slight variation. And that's, I move to direct the city manager to 1, bring back for council consideration a revised stormwater and parks service fee ordinance after first amending the proposed ordinance to provide A, that only the council rather than the city manager may set the fee for FY14, B, that the council will determine the amount of fee, if any, for FY14 as part of the council's FY14 budget approval process, and C, in order to save a little time, that the council be limited to setting a fee that includes a progressive tiered structure with the following elements to the extent feasible: a low-income program's social equity component, a rate for residential and small commercial customers not to exceed $5 per month, and a rate for large commercial and industrial customers not to exceed $25 per month. And 2, replace the February 4 public hearing on a new monthly city service fee with a public hearing on whether the council should refer to the May ballot a 5-year property tax levy to fund the same services that the city service fee would have funded.
Second.
Moved and seconded. George?
I've got a question, Mayor. In reference to what Greg and Betty said, I'm wondering how much trouble it would be to prepare a third option, which would be similar to what they said, which would obviate number 1, but then increase the amount, same time frame, but increase the amount for number 2. In other words, not have the flat or even tiered fee for stormwater, and raise the amount for the levy. Would that be
In other words,
to figure that into the formula?
In other words, include.
I personally favor I favor it the way that it is, but I'm just asking: is it? It might be nice to have a third option.
Are you saying that the third option would essentially include all these services as part of that levy, which they aren't currently? It's possible to do that. My concern, and this gets back to the ongoing one-time money again, a 5-year levy is 5 years of one-time money, which is, and again, as I mentioned earlier, because of where we are, I'm willing to propose that in this case for what we have. If you stick all of this into a 5-year levy, it really makes it really difficult to budget, because at the end of the 5 years you're assuming everything goes away, and now you really create a pretty significant issue. Can we? Yes, absolutely. We can put all that into a levy only. Would I recommend that? Definitely not.
Yeah, I'll accept that answer. Thank you.
Mike?
Thank you, Mayor. I'll be voting no on this for all the reasons I've stated today and in previous discussions on this, but there's one other. We're all pretty well aware that the county's likely to put a measure on the May ballot. We're aware that one or both school districts may do the same, and so it'll be a fairly crowded ballot in May. I will be surprised if all of them pass. I've had a little experience with this, and my guess is that they won't. So we're talking about this as though it's a black and white choice, that either we pass this or we have some very severe cuts to make, is the discussion that's taking place, and many would argue are severe cuts. and we're framing it as if that's our only choice. I would prefer we look, as I've said, at other options for funding that gave us a more creative approach, because I believe this is too simple an answer in a very complex time. But my concern is this: if we put this on the ballot and it does not pass, then we're left with a choice. We've said it's either this or we're going to make these cuts. So if we suddenly find that we can sell Laurelwood and use the money instead of having to make those severe cuts, or we do find another creative way not to have to make those cuts if this fails, we've harmed the city's credibility in the process by how we talk about this and not having done the harder work up front. And that concerns me too. So before we send this to the ballot, and endanger, in my opinion, other folks' ballot measures as well, I hope we'll give that more consideration.
Hey, Greg? Betty, were you in the queue before?
Yes.
Betty first and then Greg.
Okay, I want to move to separate 1 and 2 for the vote.
There's no second. All right.
No
So-
second. Well, then I'll speak to the motion. When 5 years is over, if we, assuming that we put a levy and it passes, at the end of 5 years, we can think of something else. At that time, if we have to set a fee, or if we have to, well, first we would go for another levy, I assume. And if people are satisfied with what we've done with it, they'd probably vote for it. But it's not one, and also in the meantime, we might think of other ways. Mike has the solution of how we'll get more money by annexing everything out in Santa Clara, which this would certainly give us, time to work on that. Thank you.
So I think I've got the order here. I've got George Brown, Mike Claire, George Poling, and now Greg. All right. And then we're running into our our time here, so we gotta finish this up. So George Brown.
Well, I didn't even ask to be in the queue, but since I am, I'll take advantage of it.
That's because I neglected the first go round.
You're in the queue.
I was pointing to Greg.
You know, there's one thing. I don't know if we even want to put it in the tax, the measure, the ballot measure, but it could be that if we're in a terrible recession, that's what's brought us to this point, and the revenues are dropping. They're not, but the need for the service remains the same and actually has increased in many areas. So, deficiency measures are great, and they will go part of the way. There's some other things we can do that I will suggest at other meetings, but it's still a terrible hole, and we don't know how long the recession's going to last. We have no idea. Nobody can predict that. It's really totally out of our control. We can do little things here locally, but it's the grip of a worldwide economic disorder, And so I know that the expectation would be that, let's just say, it all turns around in 3 years. Wow, now there's a excess in the general fund. The revenues are meeting expenses. Well, then it goes away once we get to that point. We might want to stock up a little rainy day fund, a little private rainy day fund, but then it could go away early if by some miracle the economy turns around and boom, things are good times again. So that can be a component of it. I don't know if it even needs to be written into it, but I would assume that would be an assumption. So the city's not going to try to build up $7 to $10 million extra every year, and we'll not know what to do with it. I mean, so I that's one thing to keep in mind.
Mike, did you want to be in the queue?
I was just spoken.
Okay, Claire.
Yeah, I appreciate Councilor Brown's question about just increasing the levy as a third option, and I appreciate the city manager's response to that. And I also appreciate your comment that if we climb out of this recession and find we don't need to be collecting these revenues, that we can abandon that option. But in the meantime, we do have some real needs that the city is filling, and I do appreciate where people are in their personal economies. My personal economy is not fantastic. But I think that I disagree with Councillor Clark's evaluation that, for me, protecting parks as a vital part of our community, I don't want it necessarily competing with the other vital parts. I think that we've given up so much in terms of our park maintenance over the years. Some of our parks are becoming a shambles, and that may be fine for some people, but it's not fine in my mind, in terms of what we want to be as a city and how we want to support each other as a community. So I'm willing to make some sacrifice, and I think there are other folks who are as well, to maintain a certain level in our city. It's not living high on the hog. It's not extravagance. It's just a basic level of service. But what I really wanted to say was, in terms of this particular vote, and I will support this this motion, we're not setting a fee now. We're not passing an ordinance now. We are keeping the process going so that we can discuss this potential stormwater parks and service fee ordinance within the context of our budget deliberations. So we're not making decisions now in terms.
But just to clarify, our intent would be is to bring an ordinance to the council sooner than later, and all that does is sets it up as a stormwater and parks fee. So actually there would be the ordinance now. What you choose to do with that, it really is part of the budget process. So as Chris mentioned, it's a mechanism that's a part of the budget process.
And still plenty of opportunity for public input about what priorities they want to see us
absolutely, just like we would with any budget process.
Yeah, which I think is very important and needs to continue.
And George, did you have something else you
Well,
wanted to say?
I was just going to say what Claire said, that it gives the public more time for more input, and obviously somebody's listening because we're making changes on what we heard the last time. So I'm willing to support the motion just to move the conversation to the next level.
Greg?
Again, with all due respect to the city manager, I'd like to see a different list of proposed cuts. I think there's other areas where we may be able to either get efficiencies or get out of certain businesses that we're in that we probably shouldn't be in. And I think there may be some sacred cows here that we're not willing to address or willing to touch, but maybe we have to. My other 2 points are this. Going back to slide 10, collecting the city service fee, I would like to know what those complications are. 1. 2, eWeb, a couple of eWeb commissioners that I've spoken with have had pushback to the idea of being our collection agency. And they suggest we collect our own money, which is a novel idea. But again, I think that that's something that we need to consider. And we need to look at the hidden cost of this, because hidden cost, for me, equals collection, it equals administration, billing, all of those things that go in with that. And the last point I'll make is this. I think we spend far too much money, from what I've been looking at in various documents, with vendors who can provide the same services that other vendors are providing from outside of the city and outside of the state. I think that we need to develop a program, if we don't already have it somewhere in the code. So I asked for this information a few days ago, where we buy Eugene first, and where possible. Because if we're going to, have people doing surveys for us, I know at least 5 firms in Eugene that are here, that pay taxes to the city that would support the city by recycling that money 3, 4, and 5 times and not taking it to exotic places like California. So that's my piece. I've said my piece on it, and I'll leave it where it is. So you know where I'm coming from.
Thank you for that. I just want to make a couple comments, and we're going to vote. And one is that what happens in our parks does affect our public safety budget. We should all be very aware of that right now, because trying to keep up with what's going on in our parks from a public safety point of view is pretty challenging right now. Car camps and the ability to have our car camping program does affect our public safety. Human resources does affect our public safety. So all of these things are kind of knit together in I'm going to just say two things, and I'm being very nice. I'm just going to say that we are required by statute to EWIP is required to collect our stormwater. So it's not an option for them. They are required to do that.
We pay them to do it.
And we pay them to do it. But it's not just it's not an option. It's not an option. And I would also I guess that's adequate. So and the other thing that I said before, and it's just something that when you're a new counselor, when I was a new mayor, you just get used to, and that you have to learn to get used to, and that is when we ask for something as counselors, if it takes much time to do it or it's a policy decision, then we have to sort of go through the process of who else around the table is interested and wants to do that before we head in that direction. So in the case of our purchasing policies, that would be the kind of broad policy that would require council to give some direction, and so you would have to go through, like we talked last time, about a work session and getting people to sign on to want to have that discussion. Procedures. All right. All those in favor of the motion, please indicate. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. In opposition, 2, it passes. Thank you all.
I will smile.
Yet